Yeah, if you can see my screen, I'm going to get started now. Okay. All right. First, let me introduce myself a little bit. May I ask, today, in today's session, we have 17 friends join us. And out of these 17 friends, um, I know some of you I know you personally. So you probably, some of you just started the photography. And some of you are pretty advanced in terms of doing photographs. I see Karen's raising her hand. Karen, do you have a question? Okay. Okay, so let's keep going. So today, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share some of the knowledges, experiences I accumulated these years. Maybe first I should introduce myself a little bit. My name is Kevin Yang. I am a IT professional by trade. I am also a amateur photographer, and I started doing digital photography in year 2010. It's almost 10 years. I treat myself that year Christmas with a gift of Canon 5D Mark II, and together with two uh, very heavy lenses. And I did not do any have had any photography experience before that. And one of my neighbors, I saw his photographs, and I thinking, oh, that's a very cool thing to do. So I went out, spent $5,000, and we bought a camera and some lenses, which I have absolutely no idea how to use them. That's where I started. Um, and after I got the camera and I play with it a little bit, and I also went on quite a few of these workshops with uh, some of my fellow photographers, and also with some of those very famous photographers to Africa, to Canadian Rockies, and we shoot some very impressive animals and mountain ranges in Canada. And and I talk to myself and I says, okay, what do I enjoy the most about this photography business? So I found out I really like doing people photography. Take a pictures of people, portraits. So that's why in actually around about year 2012, and I said it to myself, maybe I should concentrate a little bit more energy on the portrait photography. That's where I started, and it has been almost starting photography 10 years and 8 years. And I know some of you probably have more experience than I do, and some of you also are better photographers than I do. Because I'm thinking that I have a lot of room to improve. So today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to share so what I have learned all these years in terms of the portrait photography, and and we can discuss about the merit and also the trade and the tips and the tricks of the portrait photography, so we can make all of us better photographers in terms of shooting people. So this is what I'm trying to do tonight. Okay, so talking about portrait photographies, um, as a person who was studying IT, also in the uh, area focusing on technologies, I like to know, that not just hows, but whys behind the scenes, about everything I do. So so we wanted to, when we talk about portrait photography, is what is portrait photography? We wanted to know, how do we define it? Of course, this is the year 2020. Then we go to Wikipedia. I think maybe 20 years back, we're not gonna go to Wikipedia, but we're gonna go to Encyclopedia Britannica or Oxford Dictionary for such a definition. But today we're going to Wikipedia. Wikipedia says portrait photography or portraiture in photography is a photograph of a person or group of people that capture the personality of the subject by using effective lighting, backdrops, and poses. So that's the definition. So what that tells us, number one, the subject of portrait photography is people. We do not talk about the grandeur of the mountains. We do not talk about the wildlife. So we do not talk about the flowers. We talk about people, a person, a human being, and which has very unique things about them. They have emotions. Human beings got emotions, and they have expressions, facial expressions, and they have a body languages. Those kind of things. So that's the subject. And the second one that we know about portrait photography is we have to capture not only that moment, like we capture a moment of the grand view today somewhere, or capture that moment of a wild animal, one animal eating another animal, something like that. But we are more interested in the personality and emotions of that particular person we're taking picture of. So that tells us, like we need to have two skills. We not only need to have the skills of photography, we need to know how to operate the cameras. We need to know the basic concept of composition. We need to understand what is the depth of fields, and then we need to have skills to post-process the photos after we capture it in the camera. Not only that, we need all these, but in addition to that, we need to know how to capture emotions. And how do you capture emotions? The key is something called a communication. And that's unique to human beings, that we communicate to each other. And using the communications that we draw the personality, we draw the expressions out of the other human being. So this definition itself gives us a lot of clue how should we go about this portrait photography business. Okay, so now we talk. Now we want to know, since we talk about the portrait, we want to know what makes a good portrait. If we don't know what portrait is good, and then we probably will not be able to make a good one, right? So we need to know what makes a portraiture good. And I listed a few of these bullet points here, and this is combination of, I read it somewhere. I kind of summarized my experiences a little bit and put it out there. It may not be, I wouldn't say this is a complete list. And I would say these are the important bullet points that, to me, that at least when you satisfy these things, and to me, it is a good portraiture. Okay, so number one, you look at this, a good portraiture. Number one, that you want to see a good portraiture, it should be a technically sound photograph. Like above everything, it is a photograph, and it need to be a good photograph. And when we say a technically sound photograph, we're talking about a good exposure. You are not too dark, it's not too bright. It's just about every details are visible and sharp, in focus. All these kind of things. So that's what we're talking about. Technically sound. Second, a good portraiture should express the characters and the emotions that we already talked about in the definition. If there is no character and no emotion, it's just a photograph. It's not a good portraiture. Okay. And besides, so, but with when we talk about the characters' emotions, we talk about the subject itself. But beyond that, um, we also need to pay attention that to the background. The whatever behind the subject, even though they are not the subject of this photograph, the background is very important. It need complementary to the subject, and they also need to enhance the subject. It should not distracting a viewer from the subject. So we, in other words, we do not want a subject, the background becomes the subject. So that's pretty obvious. But it's a lot of times, I know, at least me, at the very beginning when I learned how to do these portraitures, I always make the mistake of not pay attention to the backgrounds. Okay, a good portraiture, last one, it should touch and move the viewer. That makes it good. In the end of the day, I think this is not unique to the portraiture. It's also any photograph. When you talk about it is good, it is the viewer that if you can touch the viewer, draw the viewer in, and make the viewer wanted to see more, linger, and that is good. That's where the photograph becomes good. So that's the 4 bullet point. Like I said, it's not a complete list, and you may have your own list and other things, and we can certainly discuss that. And but these are the things that I think is very, at least on my top of my list for good portraiture. Okay, so for those people that who just started photography, I got these questions, and oh, what kind of camera should I buy? What equipment is required for portrait photography? To be honest, portrait photography is very it does not require very special equipment. Like almost any camera will allow you to do a very good portrait. Um, that 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 even with your cell phone or a smartphone is a very good camera, a very good equipment for you to take a portraiture here. Yeah, there are certain things like you want some certain effects. You might have to go beyond your camera, phone, or your point and shoot camera. For example, you want a very blurry background that may require you have a longer focal lens, and also the lens have a wider aperture. And sometimes you wanted to shoot in the sports. You want to capture and freeze the moment. That requires you have very high shutter speed, and also you'll be able to shoot more pictures within like every second, so that you can really capture that moment. Um, and if you do a studio portrait sessions, you probably need to have some studio lightings. Those are the special things you might require, when you go into those areas. However, that's not necessary. Like the portrait, you could pick up any phone, you can take the portraits. Yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of glanced through all these pictures, the slides before. Let me go back a little bit. And these are the photos that I took, and I'm thinking that it's kind of special to me. Now, this particular person, this photo here, he is my neighbor, and he is a poet. He's not a poet by trade, but he writes very beautiful poets. And I was taking that day. I remember taking this picture. I was taking a picture for his wife. I was setting her up and taking pictures, and he would just come to see about the session. So I look at him and says, okay, hey, I found it very interesting. I said, why don't you come and I can take some few pictures of you. So he stands there, and we got a couple poses, and I captured this one. So to me, this one captures his character. He's a quiet person, and a deep thinker, and a sharp observer of the world around him. I'm looking at this particular one, and he's not looking at a camera. He's crossing his arms, and he's looking up, and feels like he's thinking about something. So I'm pretty satisfied with this one. Actually, in that whole session, in uh, I'm not quite sure I remember any of the pictures I took of his wife, but I do remember this one, and I like this one very much. That's interesting. And this picture, I want to say, this lady, she was the first female F1 race car driver in China. And she got a lot of pictures. She got a lot of commercial pictures. She was in the race car driving, suits, the jumpsuits, and also with the helmets on her side by the cars. But this is at one of my friend's house, and I just met her, and we chat a little bit. I said, "Oh, yeah, why don't we take some pictures?" Um, so I take some couple pictures and couple snapshots, and it's very kind of ordinary, not special. But then she kind of tilt her head a little bit, and I saw that, and I asked her to do that again. I take this picture. I I like this picture. It gives me a sense of um, her, as a female competitor in a male predominant world, especially right now in China, that the race car driver, there's not a lot of female race car drivers, mostly are male. Um, so this gives me that shows her curiosity and also her uh, kind of she does not want to just be a nice girl, and she wanted to be something special. She got that kind of a desire. Uh, this thing said that to me. So I like this photo a little bit more than the other ones. And this photo, it's also interesting that most of the photos that you wanted to have the eyes seen, and then this one I didn't. It's in the shadows, and the eyes in the shadows with the hair, and this is also I like it. The reason being, if you see this particular model, like everybody saw other photos I took and saying that um, her eyes are very intense, and it make you, when you take a regular photos of her, and you make you thinking that she's kind of very intense. She's not, and she's not very very soft. But to me, with her eyes in the shadow, and this kind of give me a different kind of her, and a personality I can see underneath that kind of intensity on the surface. So that's why I like this very much. Okay, let's keep going with our lecture of this. So when we talk about um, portraitures, you know, I know at least a lot of people will talk about you need to make the subject relax. And how do you do that? Is it okay? The best way is you don't let them know you're shooting the picture of them. You just kind of shoot a picture without them knowing it, so they will be relaxed, and that's good. So this is like two types of shooting of the portraitures. One is doing a snapshot, and the other one is you actually, as a photographer, you pose the models, and you pose them to the specific poses and with specific backgrounds and lightings. Um, then you shoot a picture. And I wanted to talk about both scenarios. I'm not kind of dismissing any of these as not good, but I think it's two different ways you can shoot a portrait. Snapshot, it's got its advantages, but it's also got its disadvantages. The snapshots, mostly that you're doing it without the subject noticing it. Yeah, it is in their natural state. However, the snapshot, you as a photographer, you are not really kind of participating in the creation of that moment. You are only an observer. You basically is a observer of that moment. You observe it and you capture it, and which is fine. You know that sometimes you need a lot of observers, and some of the moment you observe is very very important, very very unique, very very interesting, and but uh, the, the pose, the portraitures, it that actually requires a little bit more of the photographer because you need to be able to have a vision first. You need to have your own artistic vision, and you need use your other skills like communication skills, lighting skills, and all these other skills to realize that vision. Okay, so it's two different kind of, to me, a creative process here. It I wouldn't say that one has a distinct advantage over the other. It's just different. And there is also preferences, preferences of photographers, which method they're gonna use to create their photos. And in both ways, there are some great photos created in today by different photographers. Okay, snapshot. you know this photo is a girl. This is not a really a snapshot. This is actually, I would call, a dynamic posing. So this is, we saw this. I saw her, under the tree of these cherry flowers, and some cherry flowers flowing down, and I asked her to touch the flowers, so create a little ring of flower uh, coming down to her. So this is not really a snapshot. It's a kind of a semi-posed snapshot, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Um, so with the snapshot, there are some of those snapshots, some of those things that you can only do the snapshots. For example, the stage photography. Then you shoot somebody who's performing on the stage. Okay. Um, of course, that during the performances, you are not allowed to posing all the dancers on the stage. It's not possible. So you're basically is an observer. However, this is a special case. Why? Because the lighting, when they put up this performance, and then there is a stage lighting, which is normally very meticulously designed. It's a beautiful designed to enhance the beauty of the dancers and things like that, and the performers. And also there is a choreography that designed to make this whole performance beautiful and pleasing to the audience. And all these performers are professionals, and they know how to control their body, and it's everything's gonna be beautiful. So you could get really nice portraiture snapshot without you have to do the communication, do the posing, anything like that. You just need to capture the moment. Well, there are certain key elements for you to create these beautiful snapshots that you need to be able to familiar with the performances. You need to know when they're gonna have that one beautiful pose that worth you clicking the shutter to capture it. And sometimes when they're doing the jumpings and things like that, you need to anticipate when they're gonna do the jump. So when they jump it, you will click the shutter and capture that moment. Um, and there is other things and some technical things that you need to pay attention. For example, the ISOs and the exposures, because the lightings will change on the stage. So there are some skills that you need to practice to get these. But this is a special case that you could get some really beautiful photograph of. Oh, these are some other stage portraitures that I took. This one of my daughter, and I made some post processing and make everybody black and white, so she was standing out a little bit in the front. Um, so as you can see, you can somebody else designed the light, designed the choreography, and somebody else did the hard work of performing. But you also need how to at the right moment click the shutter and how to set up your camera correctly, so all these photos will come up beautifully. Another special case of portraiture is sports. Um, and the sports, it's about the same. They are professionals and they have a beautiful physique. So these athletes, they have very beautiful muscle tones, and then when they in a very competitive mode and that they are very concentrated, all these and the tensions of competitiveness of a sports match, it's just beautiful to shoot. And yeah, you cannot pose any of these guys, and you just need to capture it. Of course, the sports, shooting the sports, you need some special things as well. You need special equipment, longer lenses, because normally they are a little too far away, and you need sometimes you need a permissions that they'll go down to the sideline so that you can get a little bit closer to shoot a better picture. So I noticed that in the audience up there in the bleachers, normally it's very hard to shoot these pictures very nicely. You can see this one, the polo match. I was um, down there by the sidelines, so my camera angle is low. I do not go up there shooting down on them. So this makes more dramatic, makes more interesting of a photo. Okay. Okay, so remember that little the cherry shower coming down to the girl. So I call these things dynamic posing. So what these are is, yes, these photos are posed, but they're they're not like freeze, ask the model or the subject to freeze there, and rather they are doing something. So it's kind of that moment you want to capture, but we can ask them to do it over and over again. So I call it a dynamic posing, which is I kind of invented the word myself, but I don't even know this is there's a term for this or not. But this is sometimes will give us very interesting photos, because I know the dancers, for example, that uh, this male dancer, I know he can do all these very unique, very crazy things with his body. So, but if we shoot it on the stage, sometimes I could not get the right angle, good angle, and lighting correctly. So we invited him to my studio, and we set up all the lights and just asked him to do these specific moves, and over again, and we just capturing some of those interesting moves right there. So it's posing. It's not a snapshot during the performance, but this sometimes will give us a very dramatic photo here. Okay, so we talked enough about this snapshot. So now let's talk about the posing itself. And I am absolutely thinking, when you talk of portraitures, you cannot not to talk about posing. You cannot just call yourself a portrait photographer, just going out there and taking snapshots without people knowing it. That's not gonna cut it. So we have to pose people. And why? Because, like I said before, posing is not only to set up the model to a beautiful pose and then shoot a picture. Posing is a process that almost turned the photographer into a director. You have this vision, final vision, artistic vision of what the final product's gonna look like. And and you use your model, your subject's body, and the props and the backgrounds to realize that vision. Okay, so this is the ultimate artistic creative creation process here. So we definitely, if you're not comfortable with posing the people, you still gotta try it, because if you don't do the posing, that you are not getting to that stage that you really understand the art of the portraiture. That's at least um, my understanding is. And we talk about portraiture is about communications, and here the posing is also a communication between the photographer and also the subject, and that's most people will understand that the communication. But if you think about it a little bit more, the communication of a portraiture happens actually twice. The number one is everybody knows the communication between the model and the photographer. So you communicate to the model, give instructions, or get feedbacks so that you can realize your vision there. But there's also another communication happens after you have done with the portraiture and you have printed out um, and put it on the wall, and there's a viewer come to look at that photograph. So there is a secondary communication between the viewer and also the subject inside of that portrait. And that experience, that communication mostly is soundless. There's no word, but there are things going on in the viewer's head based on what you have captured in the photo. And this communication is also designed at the time when you shoot the picture. So you are, in the end, you are not only shoot that picture, but you also designed in the photo how it is going to be viewed. This art, in the end, how it is going to be understood by the viewer. So this is also important. This sounds a little not very easy to understand about these two levels of communication. But a lot of times these are subconscious. Like for the photographers, you don't have to consciously knowing that you're designing this moment of viewer looking at it. You don't have to, you just want to shoot a beautiful picture. But subconsciously, a good photographer, that you are actually doing these two, you are designing these two communications and capture it, encapsulate it in the final product of this photo. And so in the end, this will be a very impressing art for the viewers. So yeah, I just talking about this two communications. I just talked about these two communications. Number one is between the photographer and the model, and number two is between the viewer and also the model. And both, if carefully designed, is gonna be really, really important for the greatness of the final product. So let's talk about a little bit details of these posings. The eyes, when you talk about the eyes, because a human being, the emotions, most of the emotions are expressive by the eyes. So that's why the eyes are so important in the portraitures. And specifically, when we talk about the eyes, what do we need to worry about? Is two things: catch lights and something called a gaze. Okay, so what is a catch light? Catch light is in a photo, in the iris, it's a little bright section of that particular in the iris. And why is that so important? Somehow The human psychology is when you see um, a human eyes in the iris, there is a little bright spot, and you feel like this eye is coming to life. If you have a totally dark iris without any bright areas, it's very scary. It's very scary. That is when you see some of the sci-fi movies or horror movies. You see those crazy demons, and they have this big black eyes with nothing in it. That's very, very scary. That has to do with human psychology here. So we need that. We need have that little catchlight to bring this human being alive, to make it talking to, make these eyes talking to. So how do we make these things, make the catchlight? If you using a strobe, a studio strobe or flash or something like that, that's very simple. That's where the strobe is. Your eyes reflecting that will become your catchlight. Okay, but when you're using the natural lights, the sun or something like that, how do you create a catchlight? This is just this is when you create a portraiture, you cannot. You have to control the lights in your environment. So you have to make the surrounding darker, and then you make the source of a light, for example, a window, brighter than the surrounding areas, other areas, which lit up your subject. So that will create a relatively brighter reflection in your iris, in the subject iris. So it is very important. We need to have that catchlight. Well, there are that exceptions. Always. There's rules. There always. Somebody said the rules are there for us to break them. So yeah, there are still great photos without a catchlight, but in most of the times, that a catchlight will bring the subject to life. And second thing I want to talk about is gaze. When you look at the portraitures, where the eye is looking at is important. Like I know most people, when they shoot a picture of a person, they will always yell it to the subject, "Hey, look at the camera! Look at the camera!" Is that true that looking at a camera makes a great photo? Not really. Not really. Depends on what are you trying to do. Whether um, I will give you a little bit more examples later. So the gaze, that if you some of those fashion photographers, they don't like the models to look deadly into the lens, because that it's very intense when somebody look at you. Just think about it. If you talking to somebody look at your eyes without blinking and stare into your eyes, and how intense that is. How much psychological pressure that person gave it to you. So it's not really true that you always wanted the subject to look deadly into the lens. Rather, some of the fashion photographers, they're saying that you should look beyond the camera, look behind, focusing behind the camera, behind the photographer, so that almost like you are floating. You are gazing. You're kind of you're looking this way, but you're not too intense. You are very soft. Kind of just glance to this direction or something like that. So that is where the gaze coming from. That where you're placing your eyes. And do you really want to? Sometimes you don't even need to look at the camera at all. Like I have examples. This young man, he's looking out a window. That's also good. You don't have to look at the camera. And this lady, have her back to the camera, and that makes a good profile, of her face. And this lady who's looking at a camera, but she was not like very intensely looking into the camera. in this photo, in looking at a camera, is communicating to the viewers, and I think is the right way of doing it. I like this photo very much as well. I think captures her cheerful expression at that moment. So that's the eyes. Like where there is no simple answer to where you're gonna place the eyes, where you're gonna focus, but these are the things that I think if you want to shoot a good portraiture, you want to pay attention to. Okay, the posing tips for the models and the posing. The number one that I think we wanted to be aware. Most of the time when we take a portraitures, we're not taking professional models. And a regular person who is not a professional model uh, is pretty hard for them to pose it in a very, very elegant, pose, because those requires certain muscles. It requires very strong core muscles, and it requires they have trainings. Those dancers have years of trainings, and they sometimes requires flexibilities as well. So those are pretty tough. So what do we do to make those pose very pleasing, and also looks relaxed for the model? The trick is we wanted to have some kind of support. Either have a chair, a wall, or something that they can rest their hands on, lean against, rest their head on, or something like that. So it's a support is very useful in terms of shooting the amateur models. And also there is difference between feminine poses and the masculine poses. The man and the female a man and a woman should be posed differently. I think most people will understand that. Normally, that standing posing is a little bit harder than sitting. So we should start with a sitting pose. And this is just some of those rules that I use when I was working with female models here, female posing, sitting poses, and they're not totally correct. They're not. They're not only rules that you should follow, anything like that. It's just simply my experience, what worked for me, so I can share with you, and you can use that if that helps you in your photography, photograph a woman. And I think you can use that. And of course, that you will find your own poses that really works for you. So when you sit, we wanted to have their knee bent. The females. We do not want their knee to straighten up. That will create more tense. Normally in the back area and in the lower back area and things like that, we're resulting in not so good of results. And we want their back to straight and the chest to open and bent from the waist forward a little bit. And a lot of people, when they sit down, the postures, did not pay attention to the postures. They were kind of bending, not from the waist, but around their back like this, around their shoulders, around their backs. And that will create a very, not very pleasant shape of a female body. So we wanted them to, at least when I look at a women, posing them when they're sitting down, I want them to have their back straight. If they wanted to lean forward a little bit, I said, okay, bend at the waist, not anywhere else. Okay, so this is just what I think it'll work for me. And the standing poses. When female standing poses, I think there are a lot of different kind of let me see if I can draw a lot of different kind of theories that what you should do. Some people are saying that you wanted to have a weight in the back and you wanted to do sideways, so that create a very narrower a profile from the camera angle so that the lady will seems like slimmer. Uh, and all these are correct. That you have to kind of use it. In the situation and look through your lens and see what looks good. But normally, when people talking about a standing poses for the female, they're talking about the 3 lines, and they're talking about you need to have. Let me see if I can draw pictures here. Let's see. Oh, sorry. So you need to have a line shoulder, a line in the waist, and a line in the hip. And normally you want these 3 lines to converge on one side, kind of you bending this. So that makes the whole female body into this S shape. S shape. So shoulder, waist, and hip, they all kind of bending to one direction and make S shape out of this. And you wanted to have your weight on the back foot, so that it appears slimmer in the front. And also you do not want it to tuck your arms closer to your body so that it makes the arm slimmer as well. You don't want it to squeeze your arm, so make it bigger, up front. So these are the kind of, I think it's all a rule of thumb, so to speak. So you wanted to know about these rules, but you still have to, when you actually shooting the photos, that you wanted to see what is really helpful and look through your viewfinder and understand what is what looks good and what looks bad, and so you can have your own styles. Okay, so that's the standing pose. Okay, so next one, hands. And I know we're talking about the headshots today. And we're talking about a lot of these standing, but portraitures, even though when you shoot a headshot, and you wanted to understand that the posing of the body will impact your head as well. That your faces is not a isolated organ on your body. It will be affected by other things. And here we're talking about the hands. The hands are very important in terms of the female posing. The reason being is a lot of people who neglect the hands, but the hands, if it's ever showing up in the photo itself, will tell the viewers whether this model is nervous or not. All the nervousness may not be showing up on your faces, but it definitely will show up on your head. So that's why you wanted to pay attention to the hands. Like a lot of people don't, shooting portraits and they're only focused on the face. That's a mistake. So you need to look at your hands. So what you need to do is, if it's an amateur model, you may want it to have little props. Give a little things for them to play in their hands. Give the hands something to do. So that will naturally relax the hands a little bit, make it more natural. Because the hands, if I have nothing in it, they just don't know what to do about it, and they don't know where to put them. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, if you wanted to have hands, let's say, resting on your face, don't just ask them to, put your hand on your face. You just put the hands over there. Make them very, if they're not trained, nobody will be able to do that very elegantly and naturally. So what you want to show them is have them start with something else. It says, okay, why don't you put your hand on the side of your head, on your hair, and stroke your hair down, like caress your face until you reach to the chin. By the time their hands reach to their chin, the hands is relaxed. So this is one of the tricks that you can play to get the hands to relax. And believe me, these are little details that really show in the end, in the final product, that you need to pay attention to these little details. Okay, now we're gonna go to the most important, the face. Oh, posing of the face. Um, a lot of times, especially that are shooting a lot of uh, Asian ladies, so they all felt that their shape of their face is not ideal. They wanted the face to be elongated and also narrower than what it is. No matter what, and like all the ladies thinking they're overweight by like 10 pounds, which is not true. A lot of times these ladies get perfect figures and very great figures, but they still somehow they're thinking that you need to slim me down. Same thing with the face. You wanted to get my face narrower. So how do we make the face, into a different shape? Like adjusting the shape of the face. Um, well, there's a couple ways, right? So number one is by light and shadow. We're going to talk about the lighting a little bit later. Where's the shadow that naturally you are focusing on the brighter side, brighter piece of the face, this brighter side, and you feel like the face is automatically narrower, right? And or another trick is you turn your face, the angle of the face. You can have the full face facing forward. You can have the 3/4 or 7/8, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit later in the next slide. Um, and you can also use other props, like you use a hand, use other props to cover part of the face. Um, so those will dynamically changing the final shape of the face. So the little tricks. One of the things that when you're doing the headshots and the portraits, that you wanted to pay attention to the jars and the mouth, the shape of the mouth, and that's on the face. Besides the hands on your body, which can show up a lot of tension and the stress on your face. So pay attention to your mouth. You need to be a very soft mouth and the soft lips, and not to grinding your teeth, make it so intense. How do you do that? How do you do that? One of the things I always tell my model is they wanted to open their mouth slightly. They wanted to blow some of the air out of their mouth, so that so they're naturally their lips are softened, and also they can turn their face left and right or something like that to create the different shapes of the jawline. There is a lot of muscles down here in the neck that will affecting how your jaw is gonna look like. And one of the things that I know that the ladies, when they taking the photos, is nobody want to see a very sloppy and sloppy jars down here. And our men too. When we're getting older, we do not want to have a double chins and things like that. So if you look straight to the camera and you tuck your chin down, sometimes you do have a double chins. These piece of skin is just not tight enough to do that. In those cases, you have to use other means. You can turn your head left and right, use some tensions of the neck to kind of tighten up some of those skins here and to create a little bit better jaw lines here. So those little tricks that you need to pay attention, the details, the details, and details. Okay, next. Let me clear. Okay, now we talk about head positions. What kind of position? Here, I've showed you a couple head positions. This position is full face, that you can see both ears. And this is not like perfect full face. So this is, you see this ear a little bit less than that one. So it's turned a little bit, but it's mostly full face. Okay. The full face is very nice for somebody who has very symmetric faces. You know, that looks great, looks impressive. Um, yeah, but not everybody be able to pull this off. You know, everybody has a little bit of imperfections. You know, your one eye is a little bit bigger than the other. Or your one ear is a little bit higher than the other. So most of the portraits are not taking in the full face, but rather in 7/8, or this is 7/8. This is the 3/4. You know, 7/8, you can barely see another ear. You know, in this ear, the other ear will poking out a little bit, a little hint of it. So that's a 7/8. And the 3/4 is one of the eyes are pushed towards the edge of the face. That's a 3/4. Of course, then you can also do the profiles. You know, I don't know why in the old times, you know, if you're looking at the Egyptians, they only drew their profiles, and then in the Renaissance, you know, when they first printing all these portraits, they have lots of these profiles. The profiles looks great if, you know, the subjects, the nose and the mouth, they are well proportioned and things like that. But it could this is not easy pose to pull off, because it could magnify some of those imperfections that of a human face. So in the end, the most used are these two, the 7/8 and the 3/4, and these two that you got to watch the model and to see if we can use them or not. Okay, so let me clear. Let go to the next one. Okay, so we talk about we can modify the face of the shapes and using using some other things, props or hands to do this. So here, that you can see that this is a perfect using the hands to kind of accentuate the shape of the face and to make that a upside down, like egg shape face. Um, and these hands are perfectly there to enhance the shape here. And if, you know, like this lady, and she has this mask on, and with this mask, you drew more attention to her beautiful eyes. So this is all the tricks, and this is another one that if you wanted to you wanted to show up a one eyes, and they have to face you perfectly, but the face is not perfectly symmetric. That what you can do is you could add a hat, you know, kind of a covered up certain things, and also the hat will change the shape of the head a little bit. And this lady actually, she's very beautiful. She had no problem of have both eyes looking great. But you know, to me, this photos with one eye covered up with the hat, it's also make this photo a little bit more interesting. So those are some little tricks that we can use. So now we talk about the next subject is the lightings. You know, what do we when we got talking about a photography, it is the art of lighting. You know, that the lights are so important. How do we use the light to emphasize what do we want to tell, and how do we de-emphasize the stuff that we do not want the viewer to pay attention to? So there, when we talk about the lighting, you know, I have other classes and we talk about the lighting itself, but we talk about the lighting characteristics important to us photographers. There are three things that is important. Number one is intensity of the lighting and how bright it is. And what that means is we need to understand the intensity of the lighting to get correct exposure, you know. So this is a very self-explanatory. And we need to understand the direction of the lighting. The direction of the lighting is good. And this is where the lighting coming from the side will create shadows and also bright side. And that will make this imagery on the 2D surface looks 3D, looks three-dimensional. So, so the direction is how we create this illusion of the three-dimension object on this 2D photograph. Very important. Number three, that's very important for the portrait photography, is the quality of the lighting. By quality, we're talking about, sometimes we talk about soft light versus hard light, the softness of the light. And what the softness of the light, some people will mistaken that to the intensity. You know, like the darker, the dimmer light is soft light, which is not really true. The dimmer light could be a hard light as well. And a bright light, it could be a soft light. What the softness or quality is talking about is the transition between the dark area and the bright area. If the transition is smooth, not with the sharp edges, you know, with the sharp edge of the shadow, then that's a soft light. If you have a hard edge, that's a hard light. So you think about it when you are out there under the sun in the noontime, and you can see, look at your shadows. You can see that your edge of your shadow is very crisp. There's a line, there's a black, there's a white. So that's why the sunlight is a hard light. And when you are in an overcast day, you know, when it's overcasting, you go stepping outside, then you look at your shadows. What you notice, your shadow is very vague, very not defined. So you cannot point it out where is the edge of your shadow. So that's when we're talking about an overcast day, it has a soft light. So I'm only going to talk about this a little bit because this is not a lighting class. We're going to keep going talking about how these lighting are used for the portrait photography. So there are some basic lighting patterns that we use when we do the portrait photography. Split lighting, which means that you will have your light on the side of the subject, and then you have that shadow and the brightness split in the middle of the face. Not really a lot of people using that to shoot pictures because it's not very flattering, and unless you wanted to depicting a demon or something, that you normally don't use that kind of light. And you heard people will talk about broad lighting and short lighting, and this is a short lighting. So what that's in the broad lighting and short lighting. Maybe I want to go to the next. I will talk about these two on the next slide. Talk about these two on the next slide. Butterfly lighting, also called paramount lighting, and you just know about that. This is a light coming from the top and create a butterfly shadow under the nose. And in old Hollywood, in all these portraits for the female stars, they use this a lot. Loop lighting, simply you move that to the side so the shadow under your nose become a loop, not a butterfly. Rembrandt, and talk about some specific lighting that, you know, Rembrandt, when he paint portraits, uses a lot of these lighting patterns for his painting. What happens is he has a skylight on his roof, which is shining down 45 degrees to his subject. And when we doing the lighting in the photographer studio, and we use the same kind of a setup, and we call it a Rembrandt lighting. And clamshell lighting, and that means that you have a light coming from the above and also a light reflection or light come from below. So that makes almost all the shadows goes out. So the light is extremely soft, and that was great for the to make the female subject very, very soft, very, very smooth skins. So these are the basic lighting patterns. So you know about these things, and it doesn't matter because you can just watch your subject and see how, pay attention to the shadows, pay attention to the highlights, and make sure they look good. So broad light and a short light. I wanted to talk about these two quickly. What are those? So this is a broad light, means that the light shining on this piece, face, half of the face, that's facing the camera. And this is a short light. The light is shining on side of the face that's facing away from the camera. Your camera is looking at this half of the face, and it's dark. And what's light, it's not the lighting part of it. It's not facing to the camera. So this is a short light. This is a broad light, and you can see that a lot of these female portrait uses the short light, because this effectively putting a big piece of the face in the shadows, and that will effectively create a narrower face shape, in which a lot of these ladies would like. The broad light also very dramatic. It's, you can shoot that, use that, but that also makes the face more pronounced, and you pay more attention to it. So this is just two different kind of lighting pattern that you need to know about, and see how you wanted to use it. Now, remember that when we talk about the good portrait, one of the aspect is the background. We want to talk about a background, and the background need to enhance the subject. And the background could be simple, could be complex. In this case, you look at this photo here, the background is simple. It's just a dark blue wall. Nothing to it. So you are not, the background is there to make the model pop out. So your attention will immediately go into the model. So no matter what you do, whether the background is a simple background or a complex background, the most important things for you to do is to make sure that background does not distract you from the model. You wanted the model to be your center of focus. And how do you control the background? There are certain things, and today I'm just gonna mention them. You can make it background out of focus, blurring them, or you can make it a brighter, the white background, or you make it darker, like in this case, a dark background. And you can, you want to pay attention to the colors of the background so they don't compete with the color of your subject in different kind of colors. So there are things by itself, we can spend a whole class in talking about them. There's a lot of details that you can talk about them. And here we talk about whether to blur the background or make it background sharp. In this photo that we're shooting in a shopping mall, really the background, and I don't really want these background to be visible, so, and there will be distraction, and also there's a lot of lights and things like that to the subject. So I use a very long focal lens and a big aperture to make the subject, this subject I'm talking about, the subject clear and the background blurry. And in this case, my background is a part of my story. I need to tell a story. Without a background, there is no story, because she's looking out to the windows, and I need. This is a portrait, but actually, this is a kind of a borderline. Is this all about the person, or is this all about the sceneries? And you could have different interpretations. So because of that, I cannot really make it blurry. If it's a blur, the background blurred, this photo would not be a photo that interesting to me. So this photo, I need the background to be clear. So that's why you need a kind of you need to pay attention that what you want to do. I'm sorry, I need to kind of go back. I hit the wrong key here. What you want to do, and so you do the right thing, with the background, blur or sharp. And also that, like I said, the background, sometimes when the background is so so important to the portrait itself. That without a background, it's not good picture. For example, these two pictures, and with this soldier is blowing the horn, without this flag, the background, without the tent, that does not tell the whole story. If I only have the soldier by himself, and that will not be the whole story. And here, with this photo here, that it's a scenery about the autumn woods, and she's walking, and she's tired, and she's playing with her shoes, and sitting on the log. So I need this background. It's a little bit blurry, but it's not too blurry. It's got certain piece of it clear. The tree stumps are clear, but all the leaves in the distance are blurred. So that give me the exactly atmosphere that I needed for this photo, that to tell the story here. So one of the things about shooting the portraits outdoors that you have all these different backgrounds you can choose. You can these sceneries that you can put your subject into there, and they will make the portrait a lot more interesting than just a black background or white background. But the things that you have to worry about with that background is that, number one, like we said, the background need to be complementary, in terms of the color, in terms of the exposure. Like in this case, that we wanted subjects to be bright, the background to be dark. But at that very moment in that area, it's not so much easier for me to control that light and where the light's coming from. So what I have to do in this case is I have to add another off-camera flash to shine on this model, and that effectively kind of darken the background because I make the model a little bit brighter. So that's the effect I am looking for. So in the outdoors, it's very interesting, but also very challenging, that you need to use different techniques. For example, another flash, and also sometimes you wanted to use big apertures during the midday noontime, or not the perfect sunset or sunrise time. If you use the outdoor sunlight is so bright, there's no way that you'll be able to use a big aperture, for example, f2.8 or something like that, to blur the background. So what do you have to do? Because your shutter speed can only go so fast. So you have to use something called an ND filter to darken it, so that you can use a bigger aperture. This is when the equipment actually matters. You can't just use any equipment. You have to use some specialized equipment to do the jobs you want to do. So we talk about, so far, all we talk about is a single person portrait. And there are portraits are also about a group of people. That you sometimes have to shoot more than two people in the photos. To shoot a group portrait, there are other challenges besides that. What you have to posing the models and worry about the background, worry about the exposures. You need to be able to get everybody in the photo and to compose them in a very interesting composition. And you need to be able to focus them, like put them on the same focal plane, so that everybody need to be in the photo all clear. And they also need to have, because there's more than two people in a photo, they also need to have some interactions between them to make the photo interesting. In this photo, I took of my sister-in-law's family, and so it's very interesting that we make this natural triangle composition, that with the mom and dad, with the daughter in the back, and the two little ones in the front. So this is, and also I do it in such a way that their face is almost on the same focal plane. I can focus on all of them. So that's a little bit more interesting photo than if I just line them up on a straight line to shoot them right there. In focus and out of focus in a group shot. And mostly, if you want to shoot a group shot, you wanted to make sure everybody's in focus. In the left, this photo here, and I have mom and dad kissing the head of the baby. It's very interesting. The baby is also doing the kissing motion, so that makes this photo very interesting. But this also makes all three faces on the same plane, focal plane, so that I can get all three of them all clear in the photo here. And another photo here. This is actually my sister and her husband. And when I shoot a picture, her husband's in the front of her, and she is out of focus. But I think this is not a bad photo, even though she is out of focus. Why? Because this creates a playfulness out of the photo. Yeah, she's out of focus. She's not that super sharp, so super clear, but that doesn't matter. That creates a little bit more story. It looks like she's coming, just coming. I was shooting a picture of him, and she just kind of doing a photo bombing, just poke her head out and get into the photo. So this has got a little bit stories to tell. So even out of focus may not be a bad shot. I'm just trying to say that. And you look at some of these other photos. This one, I have them talking to each other, so it creates a little bit interactions. And also this way, I'll put them all in the same focal plane, so both of them can be clear. And another one here, in the middle, the photo in the middle here. At the very beginning, when I shoot it, the two boys are kind of stand up straight behind the grandpa. And it was kind of stiff, and also there is no connection between the boys and the grandpa. They all kind of like separate. So I asked the boys, oh, why don't you guys put your hand on the table? And as soon as they do that, you kind of draw these three people together. And they also put all the three faces on the same focal plane to make a better picture. Here again, the last picture here, my daughter was looking at a mirror, and mom's looking at her. Yeah, this is again only my daughter was in focus. Her reflection is in focus, and mom's out of focus. But that doesn't matter. There's a little bit story here, so I don't really care about mom is out of focus a little bit. And the last subject, I have 2 more slides and be done. Here, post-processing, the portraitures after shooting is not finished, and then you do have to do a few more steps to make the product complete. Basic adjustment that you're doing, adjust exposures, compositions, colors, and you do a little bit change the size of the photo, and you can adjusting the colors. And mostly with a portrait, there's a one very important step, post-processing step, is the skins. You want to remove some of those obvious flaws on the skins, and you want to soft the skins, and you wanted to sharpen the eyes and even the eyebrows and hairs. And also maybe you wanted to fixing the backgrounds a little bit, adding some interesting smokes behind it. Yeah, well, this is a controversy, but sometimes you do have to use the liquify tools in the Photoshop to adjust certain things that you really overlooked when you were shooting the photos and things like that. So a few post-processing steps that you want to follow. Portrait, you want to do a colored or black and white portrait? Yeah, to me, yeah, both got its merits that they serve different purposes. The black and white portraits are focusing more on the lines and textures and toenail contrast and things like that. And it's just like any good, they normally have a little bit more visual impact, and it gives you a little bit high-end, artsy kind of a look. Um, but our day-to-day portraits are mostly shooting in colors, and a lot of times you wanted to get the feel of luxurious of the clothing. The color is very important. Like we really like the colors, and a usefulness of the model. Supple skins and the rosy cheeks and all these other things you can't do without the color. So yeah, take your pick, black and white or color. And well, this is just for fun, and I did some shoot some photos, and I shoot these photos in a very bland office hallway, and of course that photo uh, it's not very interesting. So we kind of we found another photo and of a grand hotel lobby, and we placed everybody in there. I What I'm trying to say is to do such thing. You change the background. Um, there's a lot more details that you need to pay attention to, in terms of not only uh, to the proportions of the subjects and the background, and even the shadows and casted by the lights and something like that. You have to pay attention to so many of the details, otherwise it'll look really not very good. Okay, so that's it for my presentation, and we have 5 minutes left, Joyce, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess I'm open up for questions. Anybody have any questions? And go ahead.
Yeah, we got one question. Somebody asked, what is the basic equipment needs for studio portrait shooting? For example, somebody just wanted to start out. What do you recommend they start with?
Okay, if you wanted to do a studio shooting, I guess most basically, if you have a camera and you have a one uh, flashlight, and that's enough. That you can actually start, because the most important thing that is studio lighting, different from the natural lighting, is that you be able to control the directions of the light, and also the intensity of the light. So with one off camera, you need to be able to take that flash off your camera. You do not want to put that flash on your camera, and that's not a point. So if you can take that flash off, then you can start to play with it. See what you can do about it. Of course, that if you wanted to say, I wanted to have a little bit more like a studio, then you need to have a background. Then you need to have some lighting stands to hold your flashlight, and some modifiers, for example, the light box and umbrellas and something like that. But I would say if you wanted to just start at that, you wanted to you just use one flashlight and play with it a little bit. Um, and the most important aspect of uh, studio shooting is actually the size of the studio, I would say. Because if it's too small, your light, whatever coming from the flash, will get affected by the walls, the ceilings, and the backgrounds. And so it's hard for you to control. The whole point of shooting in a studio is you be able to control the light. If you have too small a room, you basically you lost that control. So that is to me, that's a very important point I wanted to drive to you guys. Any other questions?
When you say small or big, what kind of size you're talking about? Like what is the ideal size of the studio?
Okay, so
Wise and square footage wise.
Okay, so to me, the most important, the size of the studio is the length of the studio. So that I do not want it to, if you have a background, I wanted to be able to shine a light on the subject without affecting the background. Or if I have a background light without that background light to affecting the subject. So in order for me to do that, so I need to have a distance between the light, the subject and the background. I wanted to make sure that I have at least maybe 10 feet of distance between the subject and the background. And if you think about it, then the photographer, you're standing maybe anywhere from 6 feet to 10 feet. You need about 15 to 20 feet worth of length of the room for you to do it. And the width of the room, I think you can do get away with at least as little as 10 feet, because that's most of the background. If you purchase a commercial background, that's the width of a commercial background, the paper or cloth, and it's like 10 feet. So you can get away with that. It's not ideal because you put a light against the wall will act as another light modifier, reflecting the lights or something like that. It'll impact your lighting. But you can live with it. But to me, more important is the length. You want it to have at least 15 to 20 feet.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I think we got another one. Somebody asked which lens is good for portrait, 85 millimeter or 50 millimeter, or even 35.
I use both, and I found that they are useful in different ways. You know, if you're shooting a headshot, sometimes you can use 200 meters. that's pretty good. And if you wanted to shoot a 3/4 or 4 length portrait, you sometimes go down to maybe even 35 to 28. You know, I'm doing that. So I almost think that it's not, you wouldn't, some people will say, oh, there is a portrait lens, so to speak, because there's no distortions and things like that. The distortion, you have to understand, distortion of the final product is a product of the focal length of the lens, but also the distance where you're standing in relevance to the subject. Even with a wide angle lens, if you're standing away from the subject enough distance, that you will still get very little distortion if they're in close to the center of the frame. So I would say, you know, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I'll say they just different. You know, you should try all of them. If you only wanted to have a one lens to start with, I would say use 50. You know, that's very versatile. You can go close, or you can go far. But in the end, you could, you know, any lens could shoot a good portrait.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? You can unmute yourself and just ask directly, or you can use the chat box.
Yeah, I see Jesse is asking, I heard maybe 35 is good. Yeah, 35 definitely. You know, 35 you can shoot a full length portrait of the person from head to toe, you know, without standing too far, you know, and it's considered a normal lens. 35 to 50 there it is a normal lens. So a lot of street photographers use that. You know, you go onto the street, and if you go into traveling and you want to shoot the background, include a little bit more background with the portrait, and I think 35 is definitely better than 50 in that case.
I think it's also depends
Which
on.
which two lenses would you buy? Did you buy in that Christmas? Oh, I bought 24 to 70, and I bought 70 to 200. That somebody told me that these are the two lenses I will ever need. That will cover everything. If I want to come back, I want to go back to, I would say maybe I should start with a fixed lens, fixed focal lens lens, because the 24 to 70, and also by being able to change the focal length, that's not helping me to learn proper photography. So maybe I should start with a 50. If I go back, if I can do it again, and I can save myself probably like $4,000 by doing that. I can spend only like $100 for a very nice 50 millimeter lens. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think 24-70 definitely give you, more range of, shooting, right? So
yeah, and it's
more
very heavy.
versatile.
Yeah, it's very heavy lens as well. Very expensive and very heavy. Yeah. Okay, so I think we already passed the time, right?
Yeah. No more questions.
Yeah.
Thank you again,
everybody.
Kevin. That was a great lecture. We learned a lot.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And I hope you enjoyed this an hour and a half. And hopefully I can see you in the future again.
Yeah, I wanted to let you guys know, today Kevin tell us everything about portrait posing and some aspect of the lighting. Next lecture on next Saturday, we'll actually have another speaker talking about just about lighting. So different lighting positions. It's going to dive more in detail, kind of following this lecture. If you're interested in setting up studio, I think that probably will be a good lecture to follow after this. Okay? All right. Thank you, Kevin. Have a good evening. Everybody stay safe. We'll hopefully see you next Saturday again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.